Could I ask our speakers to come forward, please? Senate President Mitch Carmichael, Speaker of the House Roger Hanshaw, Senate Minority Leader Roman Prezioso will be represented by Senator Ron Stallings from Boone County and House Minority Leader Tim Miley. And with that, I'll ask, have a round of applause for our panel, please.
That's great.
And with that, Mitch, would you care to lead off?
Okay. Well, good morning. Good morning, and thank you, Don. Thank you for welcoming us to your event here this morning. I think it's fair to say you're interested in the legal ads issue, and so we hear you loud and clear and share a lot of your sentiments. So it's an issue worthy of discussion, but you always have a seat at the table, and I just want to thank you for all that the input that we've received from you and all the coverage that you provide. It's the most vital role in our democracy is a free press and making sure that people are aware of what's going on in their democracy. And so I'm sure I share the sentiment with everyone. It's with immeasurable gratitude that we thank you for what you're doing. So as we, as legislators, approach, it's the 30th day of the legislature today. It's halfway through the process. And we live in a state that's on the rebound. We are doing better, but there is so much more that we can do. And we're focused on really the creation of jobs, growth, and opportunity in our state. And the way that you do that, we believe, is one of the primary aspects of the deterrent to the creation of manufacturing jobs in West Virginia is the tax on manufacturing equipment and inventory. So it's been studied throughout history of West Virginia, it seems, at least for the recent history, from governors from both parties, renowned economists from the various spectrums that identify the tax on manufacturing equipment and inventory as the single most job-killing tax in our state. And so it is absolutely essential that we find ways to eliminate that tax and let our people compete for those jobs. Most of us that live in border counties are acutely aware of how that deters investment in our state. Particularly, in Jackson County, I'm very focused on Jackson County from the perspective of the Kaiser aluminum plant that was there, the aluminum plant that employed almost 5,000 steel workers. My father was one of them at one time. And the decline in that industry can be attributed in some degree to the tax on manufacturing equipment and inventory. You can hit a 7-iron across the river, some people can, and not pay that tax. So why would a big company pay millions of dollars in tax for a location that geographic proximity? So we have to realize that when we put this tax on our entities that want to create jobs, growth, manufacturing, might, along the Ohio River and all of our surrounding counties in our close proximity to our other counties in other states, we're hurting our own people. We're hurting our own people. So, and it doesn't take any rocket scientist to look at a map to see that West Virginia is an incredible outlier with this tax. So we're working hard to find ways to eliminate that tax. And it's not easy, or it would have already been done. And people from both parties have looked at doing it. So we're very focused on trying to get that through the Senate this year. The Senate's decided to take the lead on this issue, working very hard to achieve that. So some of the other areas that we're really focused on is an intermediate court of appeals. Let's see, Charlie, when will that be up for a vote in the Senate now? Early next week. Yeah, probably Monday, I guess, maybe Tuesday. We'll have it on third reading on Tuesday, and it's essential, we believe, for West Virginia. I know there's going to be different people feel differently about it, but we're the largest state in America, the largest state that doesn't have an intermediate court of appeals. And we've looked at many of the other changes we've made over the past several years and say our efforts are to put West Virginia in the mainstream. We want to allow our people to compete for the jobs and the opportunity on a level playing field. And when we're out of step with the rest of America, we need to get in line. Now, it'd be different if we're achieving at the highest levels of economic progress and at the top of every economic indicator, and to say, we're doing it right, the rest of America is doing it wrong. But that's not the data. That's not the data that's presented to us. So when we're out of line, and we know that other states that are successful in these in economic opportunities and jobs and growth have these entities, whether it be Intermediate Court of Appeals, whether it be the elimination of manufacturing equipment and inventory, wherever we're out of step, let's get in line and allow our people to compete for the jobs, the growth, and the opportunity. It's really that simple. And so most of us are aware of how these things aren't, it's not like we're trying to come up with some great, new, amazing, wonderful idea that the only people in America have ever done it are right here in West Virginia, and we have the unique, advantage. But the truth is, most of this stuff, we know what needs to be done. It's the political will and the courage to get it done. And I think that we've demonstrated over the past several years that we will take on tough issues, we'll do the tough things, and we'll generate jobs, growth, and opportunity for our citizens. And so we're on the march upward. It feels good to be a part of it. There's lots more we have to do. We're so focused on and really morally fractured over the situation with our foster kids in West Virginia. We have 7,000 children that are in our foster care system. And that should motivate each one of us to take an incredible effort to make sure that these children that perhaps have been dealt a bad hand in life for whatever reason now look to the state of West Virginia to help them meet their needs and to achieve all that they can be. We should never leave the halls of this state capitol without working diligently to put our children first throughout West Virginia. And these children that come from those difficult circumstances. I saw one of the flyers on our table here about ACE experiences and adverse childhood experiences and so forth. And I know my good friend Senator Stolling has talked a lot about that. So we want to put the money into the system. We want to put the legal structure around it and make sure that we're doing all we can to help these children achieve and to grow and to be amazing citizens in our state. So I know there are others to speak. I'll be just brief and say thank you. And these are the items that we're working on. Our focus is jobs, roads, opioid reduction, foster children, and continuing the improvement in our education system. So again, thank you, and it's thank you for breakfast, and it's great to be with you this morning.
Mr. President, please, in the process, the inventory tax, you mentioned where the one bill is. Where is it now? Is it up for vote, or what do you see the movement on it?
The structure of the bill now, the constitutional amendment sits in the Senate Finance Committee. The one that passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee would give, we're one of the very few states in America that has a constitutional mandate on where our personal property taxes go and how much that we can charge and so forth. So what the constitutional amendment does is to put the legislature, the people's representatives, in charge of the taxation policy of West Virginia. So it's not someone saying it's going up or it's going down. It's simply saying this is a legislative prerogative that should be we should be able to manipulate the taxes to make it the best for the citizens of West Virginia. And right now we don't have that ability. So it's in the Senate Finance Committee.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And now, Senator, we'll stay with the Senate. Senator Stallings, would you?
It's an incredible honor here to represent Senator Roman Prezioso here. When I think of all the institutional knowledge that he has brought to the table in a bipartisan fashion, I'm humbled that he has helped mentor me. Also, I think of our good friend Corey Palumbo, who's not going to be seeking re-election, and all of his knowledge and all the great things he's done. And my fellow Senator Paul Hardisty's not seeking re-election from Logan. Again, the President has mentioned several of the issues that are important. We come about it maybe a little different ways. We think that the avenue to grow our economy is through education. We need an educated, drug-free workforce. And folks, when I look at the childhood trauma that is being brought about by the substance use disorder, we are seeing a growth in ACEs before the substance use disorder really has peaked, if it's peaked. So we have not turned the spigot off, and yet we have about 30 to 40% of our children who are not going to be able to learn because of these adverse childhood experiences. So we absolutely need to invest in these early childhood, birth to 3, providing in-home services, trying to lend resilience to these children, or school's going to be out for them. So whatever money we can somehow front load this system is what we've got to do. We can't afford the out years of these children. Again, when you look at over 10,000 children in West Virginia who are homeless, 7,000 in the foster care system, and where do we need to spend that money? We need to make it the easy choice to be a foster parent or a foster family, to be a kinship care family situation. We don't need to put hurdles up. And I applaud both sides of the Capitol for trying their best to work on that system. The fear of a lot of the Senate Democrats, and I suspect the House Democrats, is that if we cut or did away with the business and inventory tax, that's a $100 million hole in the local, county, and school system budget. So again, if we can find a replacement, we'd like to get rid of this regressive tax. But when we balance the budget in West Virginia, where do we get the money? We get the money from higher education and DHHR. Now, where's that gotten us? The DHHR, we've cut about $200+ million from 15 to 17. And I put to you that that's part of the problem. We have to, I think, go back and reinvest in, again, those birth to 3 programs so that we can have strengthening household family security, family-friendly work policies, earned income tax credit, child tax credit, and focus on the first 1,000 days again, or the jail costs and all the social ills that are going to follow after that are going to be so astronomical. We're not going to be able to balance the budget. We're not going to be able to do anything in the future. So we think that putting West Virginians first will help do that. Excuse me. We need to pursue further criminal justice reforms. We need to do things that would absolutely get our patients, people with substance use disorder, into recovery and a full integration of services into recovery and back in the workforce. We would like to establish a surcharge on opioids to fund treatment and recovery. Because, folks, we do not have the money right now. We're not investing the money that needs to be done. We have skeleton programs out there that, if funded, and I'll talk about the Family Resource Network, for example. They're out here doing all this stuff as we speak, except we give them like $1 million to do it, and that's statewide. So we need to invest more into those things that will ultimately have a big impact down the road. That's where we are. Again, education has got to be key. We've got to focus on broadband expansion. We have to have clean water. We have to recruit, retain, support first responders. We need to fully fund public education, higher education, and PEIA so that we can keep our tuition down and make accessible college, higher education for our friends, for our future. Increase funding for Drug-Free Moms and Babies Project. And if you look at that as you know, we've got to, that's a tax or whatever it takes, it's an investment in our future. Because I'm telling you, we've got to invest early right now, turn the spigot off, get our kids back on the right track, get our families back in the right mode. And again, part of this has to do with a huge income gap. Rich have gotten a lot richer, the poor have gotten a lot poorer, and that's something we're going to have to handle, or again, our society will continue to crumble. Thank you.
Speaker Hanshaw, please. Thank you, sir.
Folks, good morning. Let me start this morning by talking about something that happened yesterday. Yesterday morning at 10 o'clock, we had in the House Government Organization Committee room a video presentation in which John Chambers, Charleston native, one of our neighbors from here in Charleston, former CEO of Cisco, addressed the members of the legislature. And he did so to the newly formed Joint Technology Caucus that was announced at the beginning of this year's session. The chairs of that caucus, the bipartisan chairs of that caucus, are Delegates Moore Capito from here in Kanawha County and Delegate Sean Fluharty from Wheeling in Ohio County. And in his presentation yesterday, Mr. Chambers gave us some takeaway points at the end, but the most important to me was his comment that we either have to be disruptive or be disrupted. We either have to be disruptive or we have to be disrupted. And that really framed for me how I want to approach the next 30 days of this legislative session, because we are at the halfway mark today. We're halfway home. And the question is, how do we be disruptive? How do we be disruptive? Let's talk about some of the things that we've done, some of the things that we've seen, because I believe that's why you're here this morning, and then maybe segue from there on into what we see for the next 30 days as we round out the session. Our committees are doing exactly as the President and Senator Stallings indicated. We are focused on job creation and dealing with the issues that plague so many of our small rural communities here in West Virginia. That's the priority of almost every member of the legislature, from either party, from either house. As I've said before, I think from this very podium, if you ask most members of the legislature why she or he ran for office, I think you hear some version of, I just want to make it easier for my friends and family and my neighbors to stay here in West Virginia. I think that's what motivates almost every person who puts his or her name on a ballot to do so. Now, that means different things to different people, but at the core, that's why most people run for office, or at least that's been my experience in the time that I've been here in this legislature. Our committees have tried to address that and are doing so now. I'll run through our committees and talk about what some of the things are that we've seen come out and how they relate to the concept of being disruptive. Our Committee on Judiciary in the House has taken on the role of putting more people back on a payroll by trying to take down some of the barriers to employment, some of the things that keep people from being able to actually get up and go to work. We're working on some criminal justice reform. We know that the county jail bills are plaguing all of our counties in West Virginia. Our smaller counties feel that very acutely, but no more or less painfully than even the larger counties with major municipalities. That's a problem. And it's even a problem for individuals, because we know that when individuals spend their time in incarceration, they're not being productive members of our society. They are not accruing skills that make them marketable in their communities. They're not providing for their families and building a life here in West Virginia as we want them to do. So we've been able to work together this session in the House to send bills out of our end of the building that have been intended to put more people back on the payrolls by making it easier to transition out of those facilities, out of our care as the state. We've done some significant bond and bail reform. We're looking forward to working with our Senate colleagues to make that happen and become the law here in West Virginia. Similarly, yesterday our Committee on Technology and Infrastructure began consideration of issues surrounding driver's licenses. We didn't finish that yesterday. We'll be continuing on with those bills later in the session, but the question of how do we make sure West Virginians can actually physically get to work? You know, we have over 60,000 West Virginians in our communities who have suspended driver's licenses for one reason or another. Many cite, as a cause for that, the misalignment of the civil process for driver's license adjudication and the criminal process. And when those two processes aren't aligned, we can have circumstances in which someone has been convicted of nothing, yet have his or her driver's license suspended and be unable to get to work. We think that's a problem, because people who can't get to work can't provide for their families and can't be productive. Excuse me. So our committees next week will continue working on those issues. They'll continue those bills, and you'll see more movement from us on that end. Our Committee on Energy has been working on economic development issues. We know that as a state we have to be prepared for opportunity when opportunity comes, and often that means trying to be proactive by disrupting our existing system of economic development here. One of the things that our Development Office and our Department of Commerce say they've been unable to provide when asked is the availability to say, yes, you can procure renewable energy here at your choosing. Delegate John Kelly's here. John is the Vice Chairman of our Committee on Energy. The Committee on Energy spent the last couple of meetings talking about a renewable energy bill that would make it available, make the opportunity available for companies that want to produce solar, want to purchase solar energy here in our state. We're continuing to work through that bill now. I think the Senate even has a version of that bill under consideration as well. So that conversation has to happen. We know that if we don't disrupt, and that means disrupt ourselves, then we are disrupted. And for too long, we in West Virginia have been content to be disrupted. We've been content to let others make economic decisions on our behalf without making tough economic decisions on our own. Likewise, our Committee on Government Organization has spent the summer months, and so far the last 30 days, asking the question, how do we properly license occupations in West Virginia? What occupations ought to be licensed, and what kind of training and testing and requirements ought we in West Virginia mandate before men and women go out to ply their craft in certain trades in West Virginia. That conversation remains ongoing. You'll see us continue to work on that over the course of the next 30 days as well. This is not a mass effort to do away with government oversight of regulated occupations in our state. In fact, it's the opposite of that. It's an effort to ask the question of what occupations ought to be licensed and how ought they be licensed properly. What we want to make sure is that the public is adequately protected, but that men and women who want to go on the payrolls here in West Virginia and want to go to work are able to do that. Our Committee on Finance just this week finished the last of the agency budget presentations. For those in the media who are here regularly, you know that the first period of the legislature each year is spent by the executive branch agencies making presentations to our Finance Committee on how they plan to spend their budget request in the upcoming fiscal year. We finished that. We finished it on Monday of this week, and we're now focused on how do we align the spending priorities that were outlined with the revenue projections that we have. We know that the issue of financing foster care and DHHR operations is paramount and critical to almost everyone in the legislature. I think you couldn't find a single member of the legislature to whom that isn't important. The question we now have is, how do we best work with DHHR? How do we best work with the administration to meet those goals and make sure we've actually achieved what we know to be important? Our Committee on Education continues to work in the background with the leaders of our higher education institutions here in West Virginia. We know that it's time to put a funding formula in place to allocate the state resources that we make available to the 2-year and 4-year institutions here in West Virginia. We know that if your day job is to run an organization as large as our colleges and universities, you need some certainty, or at least predictability, if not certainty, at least predictability, in terms of what your resource allocation will be for upcoming fiscal years. You can't depend on who happens to be sitting on the Finance Committee to determine the size of your state allocation for budgeting purposes. That's no way to run an institution. So we're working on that actively. That process continues. We know that if we tried to run our K through 12 school systems the way we run our colleges and universities in terms of funding, that system would be clearly identified as broken. So we're now focused on trying to make sure that happens, make sure that that's the case. Mr. Smith did not want to talk about broadband technology. He said that this morning from this podium, but I want to talk about it. In fact, I always want to talk about it because it's so important to the way we develop a 21st century economy. Everyone here who's ever heard me speak at any podium anywhere for the last 5 years heard me talk about the importance of broadband technology and expansion of internet connectivity and internet access. Last night, our Committee on Technology and Infrastructure took up consideration of another broadband expansion bill. This time, we're specifically focused on how do we allocate resources for deployment of fiber. So how do we, the state, deploy our own resources in terms of rights of way along major highways, on cell phone towers, on all the infrastructure that we as the state are charged with maintaining? How do we deploy how do we deploy those assets in a way that lets them become the conduit, no pun intended, for deployment of broadband fiber? The committee will keep working that bill. It'll move to the Judiciary Committee now for some additional investigation, additional consideration. But we want to make sure that when we're trying to recruit technology companies here to the state, that they have an opportunity to get their fiber deployed without running through significant and burdensome regulatory processes that ultimately get them where they want to be anyway, but do so with a 6 to 12 month delay. that delay alone is enough to kill a major project. So we're going to continue advancing that bill. Our Judiciary Committee will begin taking up consideration of that bill in the coming days. And from here on in, the next series of large questions that we answer is how we structure our budget. And we'll be working together with our Senate colleagues, with our colleagues in both parties and the governor's administration as we move forward in crafting a budget to have it out the door by day 60. So with that, I thank you very much for having us this morning.
Yes, question?
Yes.
I'm Andy Nicely. I'm a publisher at WB News and State Journal.
Yes.
One thing I think we need to clarify is the newspapers in this room have long been advocates for broadband.
Yes, you have. You have.
Expansion. We know the value of that. So that whole thing about the legal ad thing and broadband is, we're advocating.
Oh, I know you do. I know you do. In fact, we could use your help. We could use your help because one of the hurdles that we face as a legislature in terms of advocating for more expansion and more access is our inability to do regulation in areas preempted by the Federal Communications Commission.
Charles Young right here is our reporter. Be glad to report on anything about broadband expansion.
Well, I'm sincere in that we could use your help because we have members who will be spending part of next week in Washington, D.C., speaking directly to members of the FCC and members of the House and Senate broadband caucuses at the federal level. And the message that I've asked them to convey is we need the FCC to take one of two paths, to either do its job in terms of regulating quality of broadband internet access in America or allow states to do so. We would be more than happy to insert ourselves into that process if the opportunity was afforded us, but it isn't. It isn't. That's an area of law that's entirely preempted by federal regulatory processes, and therefore we're unable to insert ourselves into the discussion here. It's a major point of frustration for our citizens because our citizens who aren't lawyers and aren't communications industry professionals think that they can call the Public Service Commission and lodge a complaint because that's where they lodge complaints about their telephone. Telephone's not a regulated system in the way that internet service is. The FCC doesn't preempt state regulation of telecommunications at the telephone level. They do at the internet level. So our citizens face the ridiculous situation in which two services provided by the same company, billed on the same bill, paid with the same check each month, are regulated by different regulatory regimes. That's nonsensical.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good. I didn't realize that. Delegate Miley for the minority. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Don, and thank you all for allowing me to speak here this morning. I guess this will be my last one. I've spoken before you all for, I guess, 6 or 7 years now. It's always difficult being last because most people have talked about a lot of things that I would have otherwise have talked about myself. But I do want to touch upon something that the speaker just mentioned. It was really inspiring to me, and I think to those who attended John Chambers' presentation yesterday. And he talked about disrupting or being disrupted, and for too long, we've allowed our state to be disrupted, and we have been complicit in that in so many ways. I hope you weren't going to hope that I was going to be a cheerleader up here like Mitch tends to be all the time, which is great for him. But we've been complicit in that, and let me tell you what I mean by that. For far too long, we have doubled down on an industry that we know, if we are honest with ourselves privately and some publicly, has been dying for a long time. We know that. I told myself I wasn't going to bring it up, but I have to. 6 years ago, I was the speaker. Tim Armstead was the minority leader. We were being interviewed by public radio, Ashton Mara, and I forget the question, but my comment was, I wish the federal candidates would to talk less about coal and more about diversifying our economy. It wasn't that cutting edge even in 2014. There were multiple op-eds around the state demanding that I apologize to coal miners and their families for that. In fact, I Googled and I can only find the Bluefield Daily Telegraph's op-ed recently. Demanding that I apologize because, oh, by the way, I also said, because I don't know if coal is ever going to come back to where it was. That's how I ended the comment. That's it. That benign comment got multiple op-eds around the state. So we do ourselves a tremendous disservice as the media, as the press, by not being honest about where we are and where we need to go. Now, I get that different, the Charleston Gazette gets criticized for being too left, the Ogden papers get criticized for being too right. Let me just tell you that I don't believe any of you can influence elections because they're now being influenced out of Washington, I think. And we have an uphill battle as Democrats when we're dealing with some of the Democrats in Washington, to be fair. But I do think there's too much at risk for our state to not be honest about where we are. We need to identify a goal. We need to identify where we are, secondly. And thirdly, we need to identify the processes to get from here to meet our goal. John Chambers talked about disrupting or being disrupted. A long time ago, I read the book, The Leadership Challenge by Posner and Kouzes. And there's either 5 or 7 elements of leadership qualities. And one of them is challenging the process. Another one is inspiring a shared vision. And I'm afraid that in the world of politics, including in this state, we don't inspire a shared vision when we're playing politics with every bill we have, on both sides. I don't think we do that at all, and we do a disservice to our citizens that we represent and that read your papers. And so I believe that we as officials, elected officials, you as members of the media, and other leaders in our communities, pastors, business leaders, you don't have to hold a title to be a leader in your community and have influence, need to inspire that shared vision and begin to talk about it. I think we need to be honest about where we are and where we need to go. Not talk about how great things are because they're not great. Now, we can make them greater, but they're not great. I have a chart that I meant to bring with me today that showed that over the past 10 to 12 years, we've lost 20,000 students in our public education system. 50 of 55 counties lost students. Not 15 of 55. 50 of 55 counties lost students. The only ones who gained were Berkeley, Jefferson, Monongalia, Putnam, and somehow worked. That's it. Not Harrison, not Kanawha. We lost that many, and those kids won't grow up to be adults here and taxpayers here. So we've got real problems. And so what do we need to do to address some of those issues? And I don't mean to be doom and gloom up here, but we've got to be honest about where we are. Okay, I think we ought to focus on where those who are 25 to 40 want to be. Now, as government, we have to provide services to some degree from cradle to grave. I get that. But where do the 25 to 40-year-olds want to be? Either those who are here and contemplating leaving, or those who have already left and we want to get back. They want to see high-speed internet. That's a given. They could care less if they are working and living among a gay man or woman. They could care less. But we can't seem to be willing to say we also could care less, and we want to make sure you're treated fairly. And so we project that out of our state borders. Instead, we focus on inviting, no offense, Charlie, but we focus on inviting counties from Virginia because of the gun issue. That doesn't inspire the next generation. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. So what are we doing to inspire that shared vision? We talked about, the inventory and equipment tax. I'm on the verge of saying, you know what, let's do it. Let's do it because you made promises, you'll have to get rid of it, and then you'll bring the state to its financial knees. I was in a private meeting yesterday. I won't say with who, but they're pretty high up, about as high as you could go. And they said that when they're talking to businesses, there's about 20 things they want to see before they ever mention the equipment and inventory tax. Now, that was from the high-ups back here. John Chambers was almost practically invited to say, you got to get rid of the equipment and inventory tax. You know what he said? He said, you don't have to kill yourself financially. You just have to be competitive. Now, the objective data shows that we are competitive with having the equipment and inventory tax in place. He said, you kill yourself when you do stuff like that. You don't have to give a lot of money away. What you do have to do is be nimble enough to change rapidly. Money and investments are drawn to speed of implementation, not goofy policies that don't move the needle. Our population is declining. Our caseload is declining. So what do? We want to implement another layer of the court system at a cost that just elongates the legal process. Nobody, including those who I have very much respect, has been able to articulate for me a cogent reason why we actually need that. What we need to do is believe that our future can be greater than our past. Let me talk about the solar bill. because that's currently in the Energy Committee. We barely kept that from being tabled. Barely kept it from being tabled. And if it weren't for the Democrats on that committee, and I don't want to make this a partisan issue, because I think when it gets to the floor, there'll be plenty of Republican supporters for it, I hope. But it failed, I think, 14 to 11. 8 of those 14 members were Democrats. 6 were Republicans. And do the math, the ones who voted to table it, which would have killed it, were Republicans. Why? Because we've politicized everything in this state. If you're in theory against coal, then you run in fear typically. And that's sad. And we've got to be willing to recognize that our future can be greater than our past. And quite frankly, the view we have of our past is somewhat skewed and diluted because it wasn't that great. It was better in some respects, but I think we're always looking to improve where we are. So I think we need to be careful about what we do here that projects to the outside world, both in terms of that which may repel and that which may attract. We need to be mindful of that. Let me get my glasses on here. One of the things I think we ought to do, and quite frankly, it wasn't part of the Democratic platform, and I didn't even think about it until I heard John Chambers speak. He believes the focus ought to focus on future development of our technological industry that he says is imperative that we adopt and embrace, has to emanate from our universities, primarily WVU and Marshall. I know years ago when then Governor Manchin was here, he had a Bucks for Brain program. I think we really ought to consider somehow funding something like that to spur innovation and research and development that occurs right here in our state. I think that's something we can do. But you can't do that if you don't have the money to do it. And every one of these people up here will tell you we're projected to have deficits in the next 4 or 5 years. How do you make that investment if you're operating in a deficit? You don't. And so let me just say to the media, I don't think this state's going to go back blue anytime soon. I hope it does, even though I'm not going to be here, but I don't think it will. So I don't think you have to necessarily slant anything one way or the other to make that happen or to keep it from happening. I think you need to help do everything you can to make our citizens understand that while their perspective is somewhat limited, yours is broader than theirs, ours is broader than theirs, because we tend to get exposed to a lot more information that we otherwise wouldn't in our daily lives. We need to do all we can to inspire that shared vision, because people don't want to naturally move out of a comfort zone. They just don't. So we need to make sure we do what we can to help them recognize that staying in their comfort zones is going to ultimately, in the long run, be more painful than moving out of it now. Now, one of the things that, a few of the, obviously in the minority, we can't do anything without the help of the Republicans, and some of the areas that I think we're both doing good things together include, I know Speaker Hanshaw didn't mention it, but he's got a bill that he was gracious enough to allow me to co-sponsor with him that hopefully will attract significant investment. It's on the House calendar now, for people to be able to make amendments to it if they want. But I think that's a good bill. That's a bipartisan bill. That's not something that's driven by politics, hoping one side gets credit and one side gets the blame. That's a good bill. Worst case scenario, it does nothing. Best case scenario, it attracts major investments in this state. I think some of those major investments need to be in the alternative energy field, because I'm reading articles about how some of these major hedge funds are going away from investing in fossil fuels. Now, we can never get away from that, just to be clear. I mean, we are naturally rich in gas and coal and oil. We're not going to be able to get away from that, nor should we. But we also need to recognize that others around this country and world are. And so we need to at least give them options so that they can look at it in this state. There's another project that I won't mention because it wasn't mentioned before me, so I don't know whether it should be mentioned. But a project hinges on this solar bill, from what I've been told. We're in the running for a nice project in this state, hinges on the solar bill. Whether it's the right way to go or the wrong way to go, or whether it reduces your electricity costs or not, companies outside this state have as part of their internal policies a requirement that they get a certain percentage of their energy from alternative energy sources. We don't have to like it. We don't have to agree with it, but we need to at least acknowledge it and recognize that if we want to be on their list of attractive states, that's one of the things we need to do. So in closing, I didn't mean to bring anyone down, but I really think, come on, Mitch. But I really think if we're going to move West Virginia forward, like I believe we can and will, we need to focus on those things that really will. That's our education system. Senate Bill 1 was just a fantastic bill. I think we need to do more about appealing to people going to college at all levels and doing what we can, if anything, about tax credits or tax incentives to have them go to college, and even if it means taking on some student loan debt, helping them out with that, or helping employers out who hire these students who have the debt. But obviously, as John Chambers said, education is the pathway to prosperity. And you need to be educated to take advantage of some of the occupations that will be here in the future that we may not even be aware of today. He also said this is a 10-year strategy, not a 1 or 2 year strategy for the next election. Just as a side note, for those of you who have kids, grandkids, what was it? A PhD in artificial intelligence today makes an annual salary of $1.2 million. I mean, PhD in artificial intelligence. Now, I don't know how much schooling that would require, but if I knew I could come out and make $1.2 million just right away, that's something that we ought to encourage people in our state to do. And so I think we need to get behind fully funding higher education, overfunding, in a sense, higher education to help spur research and development. I think to that end, there's got to be some collaboration with the other non-Marshall and WVU colleges and universities to get them on board somehow, because I do think colleges can be the economic engine of communities. So thank you, Don, for allowing me to speak. I think we can do it. I mean, Mitch is always much more, I'm usually a glass half full kind of guy. Mitch is a glass overflowing kind of guy, whether it is or not. But we can do it together. I just believe, at the risk of sounding like Jerry Maguire, we really need to be honest with where we are and where we want to go and how we're going to get there. Because I think if we can't even recognize where we are and be honest about it, I think the truth is disarming. If we can't be honest about that, then we're just not even going to know what policies to implement to get us from point A, where we are, to point C, where we need to be. So thank you all. I appreciate it. I've appreciated the 16 years I've served. I've appreciated the last, I think, 7 or 8 years or so that I've spoken before you all. I really appreciate your hospitality. Thank you very much.
As a representative of the media in the state, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be able to have an event and have Republicans and Democrats sit down and talk to us about their thoughts and not have issues or the room separated. We have Republican papers, we have Democrat papers, we have Republican readers in the state, we have Democrat readers. It's informative and insightful, and we thank you all very much. One more round of applause for our panel. And for all the legislators who came today to attend, thank you very much. Everybody has different schedules, and we're going to break now. Let legislators who need to leave. If any of you at the panel want to take a moment and answer questions, great, but we know you have to get back over. I can't thank you all enough for being here. It's been very informative. We have over 25 media groups here. We have a wonderful panel coming up next on aging issues and opportunities in West Virginia. We hope the media will stay, and we'll move to the front of the room. We'll also have updates on WVU's next Academic Media Day and our 19th Amendment celebration that's coming up this year.